You're welcome to Frederick Catholic University Holistic Education Center. Today I shall begin the introduction of the course, Philosophy of Life. So this is a very special course for Frederick Catholic University, and the purpose of the course, and that is why every undergraduate students are obliged compulsorily to take this course for 2 semesters, which offers 4 credit loads. So 4 credit, first semester and second semester each, the students are supposed to obtain 2 credits. And so the objective of this course is to introduce to all undergraduate students, notwithstanding whether you are in philosophy department or not, to have and train themselves to develop a philosophical thinking attitude. So this course, every student, notwithstanding the department, have to take this course. And so this is a very core course for the university. So today is just to introduce the course, and then to introduce the first section. There are different units, and this course is divided into different units. And so the first unit is on these aspects, which has to do with philosophical thinking and method. So what I'm going to do today is to expose philosophy and then the attitude and spirit of philosophical thinking and method to you, the students. So I hope that you will benefit from this course generally, and especially for what we are going to do today. So this is what the subject matter we hope to cover today, we hope to discuss today. And I hope you will continue the conversation even after the class, and because that is exactly what philosophy is. So today we are going to look at, first of all, introduction, which is what I've already begun doing. And then we are going to look at what is philosophy. What is philosophy? We are going to attempt to give a definition or a description or different attitude towards answering the question, what is philosophy? Then we are going to look at the spirit and the attitude of philosophical thinking. And as you can see in the slide, in brackets, there's Western philosophical thinking. And I did that consciously, and which we are going to explain with time, why there is Western in brackets philosophical thinking. Then we have the fourth. We're going to look at philosophical thinking and philosophical life. So basically these are what we're going to discuss. And I hope you enjoy the conversation and you participate in the whole program. And then of course you can send in your questions. And you can ask questions as we go, and then you can also send in your questions later. Now let us begin with the first. What is philosophy? Now, and that is, if you like, I would say that the question, what is philosophy, is one of the perennial problem of philosophy. So when we say perennial problem in philosophy, we mean there are certain problems or questions in philosophy through the history of humanity that when human beings started taking time to engage in some kind of more profound and critical reflection about the realities around them, the question, what is philosophy, is one of those problems. Just like how did the world come to be? What is the meaning of life? So these are the kind of what we call perennial problem. What is truth? What is justice? So at every different period of human existence, philosophical traditions, philosophical history, these questions keep reoccurring, and that is why we call them perennial problems. So every epoch in philosophical traditions and thinking and history, there will always be the question, what is philosophy? Okay, so what we are going to do today is to just give some kind of response to these questions. And that will now help us to understand different concepts and definitions and descriptions of what philosophy is. So the question and objective of philosophy. And that is what we are going to look at. So what the first time now, there is this Sir Joseph Pieper, a philosopher, a very lucid, clear, contemporary philosopher, Christian philosopher, Catholic philosopher. His books, I recommend his books because he writes in a very simple but at the same time profound way. So there are two of his books as you're going to see in the reference, which I encourage you to look at, and that will help you to really understand the question of what is philosophy, the importance of philosophy, why philosophy, and why should everyone, whether you are majoring in philosophy or not, why you should appreciate and have some kind of philosophical attitude, more so as a university student, or if you like, a properly educated person. So this is very important. So in this book, Leisure, the Basic of Culture, which you can look. So these thoughts, we are going to get a quotation from this book later in the next slide, but let us continue in our reflection on what philosophy is. But before we answer that question, we need to make a distinction between being rational and being a philosopher. Okay, because that is very important. Because sometimes you hear people say everybody is a philosopher. Okay, is everyone a philosopher? If everyone is not a philosopher, why? And if everyone is a philosopher, why did we say everyone is a philosopher? So being rational and being a philosopher, they are two different things. So being rational, every human being, if you like, potentially, in potentiality, has rationality. And that is why from the classical attributed to Aristotle and down to Boëtius, the human person has been defined from the perspective of having the capacity of rationality. So we talk about being rational animal and having a rational soul or intellectual soul, or as Boëtius, the Middle Ages philosopher and theologian, Aristotelian philosopher and theologian. We also say, of course, having some influence of also, of course, the patristic Platonic tradition, defining the person as an individual substance of a rational nature. So you see, that rationality has always been critical and fundamental in the definition of humans, all human beings, notwithstanding the age or the race or whatever. Every human being has, in essence, the quiddity, especially from the Western philosophical perspective of philosophical anthropology. Every human being, quiditatively, by essence, is defined from the perspective of being rational. So, however, every human being in potentiality has that capacity for rationality, but it doesn't mean that everybody, rational capacity is of the same degree. And that is why education is important. And that is where we study. That is where we learn. So this helps to sharpen, if you like, that capacity for rationality. So everybody, because we are rational, then we can think, we can do basic computation, we can learn language, we can participate in social. So every human being is a rational being. However, that we are rational, that we can engage in rational activities, or if you like, intelligent activities, does not automatically make everyone a philosopher. Okay, so that is the first point. Okay, so that is to make the distinction between being rational and being a philosopher. We have not defined philosophy or who is a philosopher yet. So now, also let us make a decision between thinking and philosophizing. Okay, so because every human being is rational, so every human being have the capacity to think, but that does not mean we think every day. If you like, most times we are not conscious of, we don't engage in conscious thinking. We just live, we just exist, we eat, drink, play around, but that we are conscious, that we are thinking about something, it's not like it is a given. So we are human beings, every human being, because we are rational, we also have that capacity to think. So every human being generally should think and can think. Okay, but still thinking is not philosophizing. Okay, so it's not philosophizing. We are going to get to that later. So just to declare, okay, everybody can think because everybody is rational, but everybody, it doesn't mean because we are rational and we think, therefore we are at every thinking philosophizing, and therefore we are all philosophers. Okay, so that is the point we want to make here. So now, who is a philosopher? Okay, so that is what we are going to. Before we answer the question, that is also the part of the dialectic attitude of the question. We need to know first of all what philosophy is, then before we know who is a philosopher, or do we need to first of all know who is a philosopher, and then looking at what he or she is doing as a philosopher, then we understand what philosophy is. So that is also an interesting thing about the question. Which of the questions comes first? Is it what is philosophy, or who is the philosopher? So do we need to know what philosophy is before we say, okay, this is a philosopher? Or do we need to know, okay, well, we know who philosophers are, and then we say this is what philosophy is? And the same question applies to art. I remember I have a very good friend who's a professional artist, and then we always debate about what is art. So I think that's what applies there. So do we need to know what art is by looking at those who are artists, or do we need to first of all know clearly, the quiddity of art, what art is, before we can now say this is an artist? So this is part of the whole fundamental question, and that also links being an artist and being a philosopher. Brings them having some kind of fundamental relation. Okay, now what is philosophy? Who is a philosopher? What is philosophy? Now we are going to now look at the four. What I'm going to do is to give us 4 ways of responding to this question: what is philosophy? Okay, and then after which we can now know, okay, this is a philosopher, this is not a philosopher, even though these persons think, or these persons think, but they are not philosophers, so they are philosophers. So we are going to look at that. Okay, now, so then let us now go to Joseph Pieper in his work, In Defense of Philosophy. So the subtitle of this book, very small book, I recommend it, very powerful, very rich in thought, and very simple. That is why I recommend his works. Very simple. Sometimes philosophers are known traditionally, especially in Western philosophical tradition. We have many philosophers that are very difficult to read, very, very difficult to read. There are many of them out there. Pieper's work is, for me, I think, very simple. So the title of this book is In Defense of Philosophy, the Power of the Mind for Good or Evil, consists in argumentation. Okay, and that is very important. Argumentation, note that word, is very important. It's very fundamental in the whole thing about philosophizing. Argumentation or disputation, it's very important in philosophy. It's very, very important, which we are going to see later. So now, there's this quote from his book, page 12. It says, to engage in philosophy, note it, to engage in philosophy means to reflect on the totality of things we encounter. So that is first. To engage in philosophy. So what does it mean to philosophize? Joseph Pieper is giving us a very good response. What does it mean? To engage in philosophy, to philosophize, in other words, to philosophize means to reflect on the totality of things we encounter. So note that word, totality of things. Okay, let me read it through and then we explain. In view of their ultimate reasons. And philosophy, thus understood, is a meaningful, even necessary endeavor with which man and woman, the spiritual being, cannot dispense. Okay, let us dissect this, because that will help us to understand the whole question of what is philosophy, who is a philosopher, what does it mean to philosophize, and how is it different from mere thinking. So, to engage in philosophy or to philosophize means what? To reflect. So that is the first word, to reflect. So reflection is of a different level from thinking. Okay, that is the first word. So philosopher reflects, not just think. Okay, that is first. But reflect on what? The totality of things. That's very important. So what they say? The totality of things means it is not things in their parts. For example, physics. In physics, the physicist, focuses on the physical part. The word physics is from physis, the Greek. So your nature, if you like. So the physicist focuses on the philosophical phenomena of nature, of the universe, of reality. The biologist, life. So the biologist focuses on the living, phenomena of reality, and then the chemist in chemistry focuses on the chemical part, of reality. The sociologist focuses on the social phenomena. Yeah? So and you can name the psychologist focuses on the psychical part, on the mental part, and how it relates to behavior. So there are different parts. But the philosopher focuses on reality in itself. That is the point. So on the totality of things, reality in itself. So this word per se, so that's in itself is very, very important. So as a philosopher or somebody who is thinking philosophically or who is philosophizing looks at things in their essence. Okay, then look at the next side. In view of their ultimate reasons. That's another very important. So when the philosopher reflects at reality, he reflects at reality in the view of its ultimate causes or reasons or principles. In other words, the end of that. For example, if a philosopher looks at a human being, the philosopher looks at what is the end, what is the ultimate reason of being a human person. Not just the cultural part of this person, and not just the sociological part, the political part, the economic part, the biological part, the anatomical part, or the physical part. Look at what is the end and the essence of being a person. Okay, so if that now he says, having these two, looking at things in totality and in view of their ultimate reasons, then nobody can argue that it is not a meaningful venture to engage in. So what it means is that by the means of this course, we are to instigate in the minds of the students, all undergraduate students in Fujian Catholic University, And of course, all those who will have the benefit to listen to these courses, to begin to look at things as a philosopher will look at it. Okay, in other words, begin to be a micro philosopher in your own way. And this is important. Philosophy and philosophizing, in fact, at least the attitude is something that university education itself should give to every person.